In this video, I'm going to really quickly highlight some of the main points from Writing with Sources Chapter 2. So this talks about primarily how to bring in sources and some of its technicalities, and some of it is just sort of keeping your mind on the purpose of the sources that you're bringing in. So it talks about specific ways to bring in a source, like it could be quoting or summarizing or paraphrasing or just referencing it. There's a lot of different ways. I'm not going to recap all of those in this video. That's what the book is for. But be aware you should be familiar with those different ways because you want to know that there's multiple ways to use sources. He also gives you what he calls his 3 principles of using sources. And I'm going to kind of get the highlights of those 3 because those are pretty important things to keep in mind about the role of research and sources in our writing. So the first one, he's just saying be as concise as possible when you're using sources. Don't let them take over your paper. Don't put in lots of stuff from sources because your teacher said you needed a bunch, but it doesn't really have anything to do with your purpose. You want them to only be part of your writing and your discussion when it actually matters and has a purpose, serves a function. Second one, don't ever let the reader wonder whether these ideas are yours or from the source. You want to always make it clear when it's coming from a source, and also you can find ways in context to make it clear when you're contributing an idea of your own as well, but you don't want it to be a question. I know that it's kind of an American cultural thing that we're like, you have to give credit to the source, and not every culture looks at it this way, but we do expect that. You can get in trouble with a teacher for plagiarism and stuff if you're not being abundantly clear that that idea came from the source. So always make sure it's clear when it came from the source. It also helps to make it clear when something is your own idea too, so that the teacher's not murky on which category it falls into. The third one is you want to always make it clear how each source and the information you're getting from that source contributes to your overall purpose, whether it's an argument or information or whatever, but it should serve a purpose besides just my teacher said I had to have 5 sources, so I'm including this information from this source so I can get to 5. That's not the reason it should be in there. It should be serving a purpose, and you should be able to articulate that purpose. A couple of other things he does in this chapter talks about choosing when to quote versus when to summarize or paraphrase. You don't always have to quote when it comes from a source. There are actually, most of the time it's better not to. You don't want to overuse the other person's words and drown out your own. And he actually includes this really great piece of information, and I love the way he said it. So this is a quote from the book when he's talking about don't overdo block quotes like long quotes. And the way he explains it is don't send your reader unguided through a long stretch of someone else's words. It can be really tempting when you're using sources to include lots of block quotes because it looks really fancy and it looks like you're very well researched and stuff, but every time you include a long section without commentary along the way, it is actually making it harder for the reader to make sense of why it's in here and what's the purpose of it being here. So you want to reserve those long quotes for times where it really matters that you're keeping the original person's words and that whole section actually has to be in there. Using that to make the paper look fancy, to make the paper longer, all of those are not reasons to do long quotations. And when you do them, especially excessively, it really is getting in the way of you being able to make your own argument. I'll talk to you guys in class about my own preferences when I'm doing research writing that have helped me keep that from becoming a problem. But just be aware that lots of long quotes is not usually a good thing, and the basic idea behind it is you want to avoid that as much as possible. You don't always have to quote. There's a lot of other good ways to use information from sources that is not quoting, but you still cite, even if you're not quoting exactly. And then one other thing just to keep in mind is he'll give you some ideas about the technicalities of quoting, like having the word that introduces the quote, how to give the right kind of context and introduce it well, and things like that. Again, read that in the book. That's not really something that translates well into saying it out loud. So you do need to make sure you've familiarized yourself with this chapter, and also just keep the book handy for when you're actually writing, because that's the time it'll be most useful. This is where you sort of make sure you've got the big picture of the information, and then have this book as a resource when you're actually writing to make sure you're doing things correctly.